So thank you everyone for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Melanie and I am the founder of the Whole Family Foundation. And our foundation exists to help families who have somebody in their family with a disability, and disability broadly but defined. And our goal is to support these families and empower them by giving them the education they need, connecting them with the resources they need. Hopefully after COVID, doing some recreational activities as a whole family, but doing everything we can to empower these families and make them healthy and whole as a family unit, and help to alleviate some of the unique stresses that come with a disability in the mix of a family structure. So we do have a lot of great resources on our website. Our website is www.thewholefamilyfoundation.com. So we would love your questions. We would love your thoughts, your ideas, but we try to do some programs every month, different topic each month. And the topic for this month is actually geared a little bit more to the people outside of the disability community, for the purposes of healthier community. When people meet someone with a disability and they're not familiar with the disability community and how to interact, it can get a little awkward and people feel like they're going to say something or do something wrong. And they may avoid a conversation. Some people probably should be a little more educated before they start a conversation, and they can be offensive and not realize they're doing so. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to just introduce the topic, and our panel is comprised of two people from our board and another special guest, and they all have different experiences in the disability community, and I will let them tell their own stories. So we're going to start. So I'm going to have everybody muted unless you're the current speaker. And then if you have any questions that you would like to ask, you can use the chat feature, which should be on the bottom of your screen. Should have a chat button that you're welcome to type in a question, and then we'll ask those questions at the end. So first I'm going to introduce Erica Jenkins. Erica is on our board, and she is going to tell you about her and her awesome son, Evan.
Hello, I'm Erica. I moved rooms so y'all wouldn't have to hear my son's TV shows in the background while I talk. But I'm going to talk to you about my son, Evan. He is 8 years old. Well, he'll be 8 in July. He's not 8 yet. He'll be 8 in July. He is a very awesome little boy. He is a big fan of Mickey Mouse and Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, and loves to read books and go to school and play on his iPad. Typical 7-year-old little boy stuff. He was born with a rare genetic disorder it doesn't have like a syndrome or anything specific like stapled to it, but it's just a plethora of cognitive and physical disabilities that he has going on. But thanks to physical, occupational, speech therapy, and all of his doctors, he is thriving and striving. And something that I try to do when I talk about him, if you may have noticed, is I talk about Evan as Evan and who he is and the things that he likes and what kind of person he is before I talk about his disability. Something that I personally didn't even realize that I did until I started going. I went to advocacy training through the Virginia Board of People with Disabilities, and we all had to get up and introduce ourselves and talk about why we're there and who the person was that was in our life. And all of us led off with, we have a child that has a disability, ... So we were talking about the disability and not our child as a person. So they call that people first language. And that's like a big thing that now that I've learned that I try to speak about my son. Who is Evan? What is Evan? What is he like? Just like any neurotypical normal person, we wouldn't go, hey, my name's Erica, I have brown hair, or hey, my name's Melanie, I have, white skin, or just anything like that. You don't describe yourself by those kinds of things. So you describe yourself as the person that you are. And it can also be used in the context of when you're talking about someone or to someone, you wouldn't say, oh, you know, she's handicapped. You would say, oh, this is Sarah and she uses a wheelchair. Um, or like handicap accessible, we would say, instead of saying handicap parking, you may say like accessible parking. There is some like terminology and ways that we can word things to make it geared towards we're talking about people and not their disability. So I try to my to other people. But when we meet people and they meet Evan, he is smaller for his age. So a lot of people assume that he's like a toddler or a baby, and they kind of tell him, or he really. So I try to explain to them, talk to him like you would anybody else, because Evan has really good receptive language. I know that may vary for other children, or other person. Talk to him like you would any else. Kids are a little more complex, but the beautiful thing about kids is they'll ask questions because they want to learn. And I think that's one of the most exciting things for me when Evan started school, was to be able to be like, oh, hey, well, why isn't the kids, they're so more receptive to speaking to Evan and asking him questions and trying to understand like what he has going on. And I encourage and even, but I encourage parents to allow their kids to ask these questions, because it's very important for them to learn so they can become more aware and more accepting of people with disabilities. And it's okay. They shouldn't feel embarrassed or worried or concerned that they're asking those questions, because, it's a learning process. No one, unless it's really offensive, like no one should be upset, by those kinds of questions. So that's the biggest thing for me, when it comes to communicating with Evan, is just communicate with him like you would any other child, whether you're an adult or a child. And don't be afraid to ask questions about his disability and his communication device, because it's a very complex tool that he's using to learn to communicate. And he's still learning to use it. So sometimes, I do help guide his conversation with his device, but again, he understands what you're saying, even if he can't give you an immediate response. He'll figure it out and you'll figure him out. So I think it's just important in general, for all people with disabilities, but especially for my perspective of having a child, to just communicate with them like you would anybody else, but don't be afraid to have those conversations with your children, or if you're an adult, with me about my child. And I'm sorry I was breaking up.
Oh, you can't help it. Can you speak a little bit more about how Evan communicates for those who aren't familiar with a communication device? I know that communication devices can be from a simple picture board to something that talks for you, but can you just speak a little bit about where Evan is and what he's using?
We started with simple flashcards just to see what his identification and receptive language skills were. And then we moved to what's called the communication board. And it was actually just a paper copy of like the different little icons you may see on a tablet kind of device. Started to get him to point to maybe a stop sign for the word stop, or if you're familiar with sign language, this is more. They have a little sign for more, like different, they call them core words. And as he got older and kind of we learned he was developing that skill, we now have, you could do it on an iPad. You would have to buy the software for an iPad, but this is actually a separate device. It looks like a little tablet almost, and it has little screen. His has 28 little screen slots, and we can illuminate or turn off different words depending on how many we want to show for him based on what he's learning. So on his right now, he has like stop, go, more, want, play, and like, and then they can open up into subcategories. Like, of course, he's got play Mickey Mouse or want iPad. We have some social buttons like hello, goodbye. So he's able to access that and communicate. And as he grows more accustomed to it, he could carry on a fluent conversation like we are right now. type and spell words and things of that nature. But right now we're just focusing on those core words like you would teach your child from the very beginning.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we're gonna we'll go over to Jason at this point. And Jason, if you want to talk about your story, Jason is also on the board of the Whole Family Foundation with he and his wife Kate. And so I will let Jason take the rest.
Hello, my name's Jason Blackwell. My wife is here with me, but she's taken up with our 4 children. So I'm going to be here speaking with you. I loved how Erica identified as not necessarily the disability. I'm going to tell you what my disability is, but that doesn't necessarily define who I am as a person. And I like how she stated that. I had a motorcycle accident at the age of 21. Actually, yesterday was 19 years ago, was my anniversary of my accident. And I was left a quadriplegic, so I don't have any hand function. I'm paralyzed from the chest down, so I can't move my fingers or anything. And I guess in my situation, and my disability is a little different because I had an accident, and it wasn't. I was not born this way. So that being said, I guess I have a little bit different perspective as far as the disability and so forth. But I'll say that many of the things that Erica has already mentioned is very much so true. I know that I have dated in a wheelchair. I've went to college in a wheelchair. I've now been a parent in a wheelchair. I've been married since being in a wheelchair. I've adopted 3 children and on the process adopting a 4th child. So I've adopted 4 children in a wheelchair. So I've kind of run the gamut as far as lots of different things. I work full time in my wheelchair, but when you get to know somebody, I think I love how Erica mentioned that so many people are kind of scared or hesitant at first to like, oh my gosh, what is that person's disability? Well, I sometimes just flat out force the conversation because it doesn't matter really who you are. You're really curious, whether it's a child, the innocence of a child. Typically, they're going to just flat out ask. But to be honest, the innocence of an adult, they're curious as well. So a lot of times I just kind of play it off as it's the innocence of a child. But, I kind of bring in the parents and so forth as well into that topic of conversation. A lot of people just want to know who you are and why are you in that thing? And, they don't know what the terminology of a power chair versus a manual chair, versus a rear wheel drive chair or anything like that. They just know, it's something that, they see a typical grandfather or grandmother in, and it's kind of odd that a child or a young adult or, what have you might be in that wheelchair. But so that's kind of a brief synopsis of who I am. My wife and I did meet after I was in the chair. She's never known me as able-bodied. And so that's kind of the brief synopsis of who I am and so forth.
Jason, thank you for sharing that, by the way. And can you talk a little bit about what was your perspective of people with disabilities before, and would you have been the person to ask those questions before? And obviously your experience is different now, but and I know you can't speak for the whole disability community as what's appropriate and not appropriate to ask, but kind of what was your perspective before, and now you could go back and say to yourself 20 years ago, this is how you should act when you meet somebody with a disability. Do you kind of hear what I'm saying?
Sure.
Speak to that.
So, I mean, yeah, I guess throughout high school and college and so forth, early college, I was an athlete and I played 4 years of varsity basketball and I had a lot of opportunity as far as, I guess, what most people would think of a jock or whatever you want to call it. Had a lot of opportunity to play sports and so forth. And because of that, I guess I was a person that I never looked down upon somebody. And like when we played pickup basketball, I try to pick up the person that I knew wasn't the best necessarily at first. And the reason being is because I know that that person would want to win. And I mean, I tried to win as often as possible. And it's kind of sometimes great to have that influence in that person's life. That's just kind of who I was as a person prior. But I will say that anxiously, I would probably have reacted somewhat the same exact ways. I know in 2021 we're a more inclusive society, that we are able to kind of be a little bit more open or ask a few more questions potentially. But I think even 20 years ago or 25 years ago, I think it's just somebody would be very anxious about, or I would be very anxious about asking them what is that person's disability per se. Now, would I be curious? Absolutely, I would have. But you don't want to offend somebody. You want to be respectful of that person and so forth. But I think that at the same time, as you, with myself with a disability, as I try to engage people with my eyes or engage, when we go into a restaurant, let's say, instead of them looking, I have this happen quite often with the hostess, they'll look past me and look to my wife or whomever else is with me. I'm like, hey, no, I'm right here, and tell people how many people is with us. So I think it's just a growing societal change, that people are slowly getting there. And but I think that it's how it's trying to not be offensive, but I think it's how the parents can have that relationship as well as the person with the quote unquote disability. And I use that very loosely.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we're glad 19 years later you're still here.
That's right.
So I think
I just went from 6'1" to 4'8".
Well, we can only shrink waist sizes that fast, right?
Right.
Thank you. All right. Well, CJ, I'm gonna have you unmute. All right. Hold on.
Can you see? Okay.
All right. So you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves.
She said, go ahead and introduce yourself. Okay, I'll go first. She's a little shy. I'm Brandi. I'm her sister. This is Curry, like the spice. She's spicy like the spice.
There you go.
I'd like you to know. What? Yes. Okay. That I think, I don't know if she could hear the whole conversation, so I'm gonna kind of, I guess, talk for both of us, which I do that a lot. I'm sorry. But I've been with her since I was 4, so I pretty much grew up with her, and it's like I'm almost more insightful to her than I am my own kids. But basically what you were saying is what you guys both said, is that describing someone as a person before describing their as a disability or their disability, I think that's amazing. I think that she and I have kind of always just done that, just because I didn't really see her with a disability as a kid growing up. She was still my little sister who got me in trouble on a regular and loved doing it. So for me and her, that's just who we are. But Curry has cerebral palsy. She actually has had that since birth. And basically she was missing part of her esophagus, and it's caused oxygen deprivation, and that's what caused the cerebral palsy as far as we know. She is a fighter. She wasn't supposed to be here, but she is, and she's made it. She's about to turn 40, so she's about to join the 4-0 club, and she's really happy about that. What would you like to tell them about you? You, V-E-R-R-Y, very, S-M-A-R-T. She's very smart. But yeah, that's Curry. She's very smart. She understands everything you're saying. It just may take her a little bit longer to process. She has a memory like an elephant, so she remembers everything, and will hold you to it. She's exceptional. She's a really, really cool cucumber. She's happy. She's the most upbeat person I know. And I think it's really cool because, sorry.
No, take a minute.
CJ and I had a long absence from each other, and she just came to live with me about a year ago, as the pandemic kicked off. So we're still figuring a lot of stuff out. And anyway, go ahead with your questions.
No, I think you're doing a phenomenal job, and I will echo everything you said. CJ, I was very impressed by you the first time I met you, and your ability to ask questions and get out what you need to get out, and by whatever means necessary, and ask your questions, and to advocate for your needs and your preferences. So I think that's amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about CJ, how you prefer to communicate? Because I know you can vocalize some, and you point and gesture some, and you sign some, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you sometimes have used a communication device. So can you guys talk about how you prefer to communicate with people?
Did you hear? How do you prefer to communicate with people? S-I-G and sign language, and iPad. She actually started out with a communication device kind of similar to what the first lady was talking about when she was little. I remember it. It was we didn't have iPads back then. I mean, this has been a long time ago, but it was really cool because it actually had the pictures, and you push the button and it would talk, and it was, cutting edge. And she learned modified sign as her education increased. And now I think she prefers a sign language over the iPad. Like right now we're using the iPad for this, so she can't use it to communicate, but it's almost like she'd rather sign anyway. And she can, she tries to vocalize yes and no. And she's very creative in how she gets her points and wants and needs across. And a lot of times if I start talking for her, she'll shut me down. She'll tell me, okay, no, that's not what I want. And I'm like, okay. So I back up. Okay, what do you want? But that's how she communicates. I mean, she communicates through whatever, any way that she can, I guess.
CJ, can you talk about how you feel about people wanting to know about you or about your challenges? Like if you meet somebody new, are you okay with them asking about your story?
When you meet somebody new, are you okay with them asking about your story and your disability and all that good stuff? She says yes. I don't know if y'all can see her.
Yeah, I can. Do people ask you frequently, or do you feel like people want to know but they're afraid to ask?
Do people ask you a lot, or are they afraid to ask you? She hasn't really been around folks in a while, so I think that might be part of it. We did go get her haircut today, and the lady didn't ask, but she was actually really great. She asked her what she wanted with her haircut and things like that. So it was really awesome. Phenomenal. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, so it was really cool. You all right over there?
Getting
Goodness.
excited.
Yes. All right. What were you gonna say? Do you like it when people ask or no? Yes, you like it when they ask?
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you like telling them about your story? Kinda. Why don't you like to tell them about your story? What is it that you don't like? G, you can not. T, A, L, K, talk more. Or with, excuse me. Your M, O, U, with your mouth. She says she doesn't like telling people her story just simply because she can't talk with her mouth. It slows her down. Sometimes she has a whole bunch of thoughts that are a whole lot faster than she can communicate. And she'll, like the rest of us, I don't know if you've ever been typing along and all of a sudden your brain is going faster than you can type and you're skipping words and things like that. She does that. So she'll be signing and all of a sudden she'll skip, some basic stuff. And you're like, wait, slow down. Because I missed something there. And there's a whole lot of meaning there. And what were you trying to say? So that's her. I don't know.
CJ, do you feel like people tend to be patient enough to let you get what you need to say out? Is that a frustration?
Is that a frustration?
Yeah. So that's one of the things we're hoping to accomplish with this, is for people to not just assume that because somebody has an outward physical challenge that they are also mentally challenged, because did not take me long to realize how smart you are. So
you guys, this is kind of a sidetrack, but when she was in Texas living on her own or in a group home, she had a challenge that came up, and before I could even pitch in to help her with it, she actually went online and found a special, heck, I don't know what you call it, basically a disability lawyer for herself to advocate for herself. That's how intelligent she is. I don't even know if I'd know how to, I'd have to really look it up. And it was funny because it was maybe 48 hours and she had, a disability lawyer advocating for her. And it was pretty phenomenal. I was proud of her because I'm sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, this is a big thing. How do I find this? What do I do? And I'm trying to help her from Virginia. She was in Texas, and all of a sudden I get this lawyer, emailing me. And I'm like, oh God. So
good for you, CJ. Go get them.
Yeah, she did.
Well, thank you all for sharing. We'll open it up to the chat if anybody has any specific questions for anyone in the panel, or a generic question. One question that was given earlier that's not in the chat was basically, how do you, and any of you all can talk about this, and I know Evan's a little young for this, but how do you in day-to-day life, like Jason, you mentioned at restaurants and things like that, where you feel like people look past you, are you finding that to continually be difficult? Do you find the atmosphere is changing a little, where people are more receptive to you and allowing you to have time to speak for yourself? Or do you think that's still an issue in the community at large? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times it seems kind of interesting that younger kids now are a little bit more receptive, especially, let's say, as a receptionist, or a hostess or what have you. A little bit, they'll connect with you a little bit quicker and easier. I think just because our culture, let's say anybody 40 years or older, they're a little bit more apprehensive or about it. It just kind of depends on the situation. I think that's at hand. On a little bit different way, because of my profession, I speak to so many people with disabilities as well. I think that when you include like because that person with the disability has a name, they're more than it's CJ, it's Evan, it's not Erica's son. They have a name. They have a reason to be there. And I just remember specifically a situation that I had a few years ago with a gentleman that had ALS, and he had. It was kind of interesting that he was a dentist, and so very highly intelligent, and so but he was nonverbal at that point, but you could tell based upon he was very with it, and could understand everything that you were saying, but they had this blinking system that basically how they communicated, and so I kind of figured it out as time went on and so forth between he and his wife, and as you learn about somebody, I think the more time you put in with that person, the more intelligent you figure out that the person is, then especially if they have a disability, that you can figure out that they do have personalities, and they're more about than just the person in the wheelchair, if you will.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what Jason was saying, because most of y'all know about Evan, but my biological father was in an accident when I was a child, and it was very similar to Jason's situation. He became quadriplegic. It impaired a lot of his things with his communication as well. And I'm not going to go into my whole family story, but I didn't meet him until later on in life. And when I first met him, it was really hard to communicate with him because he can speak, but his enunciation and stuff of his words was hard. You really had to sit and listen to him. So like the first couple of times that we spent time together, I really had to sit and listen and figure it out. But the more we were around each other, just like any of your other family members, whether they're typical or they have a disability, you pick up on their mannerisms and you pick up on their language and on their personality. And it was really funny because we're a lot alike in our demeanor with things, and that he would say something and I would respond and we'd make like the same facial expression. But it took me a while, and it was really hard for me because I never really had to communicate with someone in regards to the way he communicated, because he didn't use a communication device or sign language. I don't know that he was never presented the opportunity. I think that, like I said, a lot of backstory. I think he was kind of angry about his disability. He never really tried to adapt to that kind of situation. So he just made people try to figure out what he was trying to tell them. Oh goodness. But yeah, so similar to what Jason was saying, it's just interesting how you get to know someone and the way that they communicate, and you learn about them that way.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I recall my father passed away from throat cancer in 2015, and he ended up having to have his whole voice box essentially removed. And so him learning how to figure out how to communicate in his frustrations. And I think the general takeaway is people are worth hearing what they have to say. And if it takes a little extra time, they're worth the investment of time. Any other questions? Anybody have any questions about how people communicate? I know there's other people on here who are our target audience with the Whole Family Foundation, in that you have a disability or care for someone who does. So if you have any additional comments, you are welcome to unmute yourself if you have a question or comment about anything that we have talked about. Y'all are a rowdy bunch.
I kind of wanted to say something really quick.
Sure.
You had asked, how you think things have changed. Are we doing better now than what we used to? As an observer, from childhood, when she was little, people used to stare and they would not ask any questions. And it was almost like they thought she was contagious. I remember thinking that when I was little. And now today, it's not like that at all. At least we haven't encountered that in a very long time. And it still surprises me when we go in someplace like a restaurant, or like today when she had her haircut and the person starts addressing her and not me. And it feels so good, but it's still a surprise because I was just so used to it, our whole life. And you used to have to initiate the conversation when somebody was staring, to kind of make it, I didn't want her to feel like somebody was staring at her. So when I was little, I used to, if I found somebody who looked, somewhat approachable staring at her, I would initiate the conversation and start trying to talk to him about, well, you can talk to her too, you don't have to. I used to advocate for her when I was little like that. And I just think it's amazing, and I guess it's 40 years. We've come to this point to where she's getting her haircut today and the lady's not looking at me. She's talking to her and waiting. I mean, literally taking her time, waiting for CJ to take her hand out from under the, the little gown that you're wearing to get your haircut, and letting her communicate what little bit she can with that one hand, which was, it was interesting. But I think we've come a long way. I still think there's a whole lot of room for improvement, but it's just really cool to see that. What do you think? Yeah. She says, yeah.
And your hair looks great. You chose really well.
She's so happy with this haircut.
I think a lot of people were happy for their first post-COVID haircut.
Yes.
So, awesome. Yeah, Jason.
I find it kind of interesting now as a parent that has a disability, and how my children react with their friends, as well as how I would feel, how people would treat me. And I had one of my children ask me the other day, how did people treat me in the past, because of me being in a wheelchair, and that was their phrasing. And I thought it was interesting that they're thinking that much ahead on thoughts of how people are treating each other. We're very much so, we don't, I mean, we don't use very many descriptive, we try to use people's names in our household, so we don't use a lot of descriptive words. Sometimes we do, but on the most of the time, it's addressing the person of who they are, what they are. But I thought it was very interesting that how my children now are seeing how they want their friends to address me, and but it's most of them feel the same way. They're like, okay, whatever. I mean, they'll ask or whatever, but it's very interesting now to see it kind of full circle with my children, much like CJ and her sister there, being able to, as adolescents and now as an adult, to seeing both sides of that. That's kind of interesting perspective as well.
Awesome. My sweet friend Kara has a question, and she's on here with her mom, Shannon. And Kara's question is, what is the best way to communicate with someone if I don't know how their way of communicating? If you're not sure how they communicate, like you can't, I guess you see CJ signing or you see Evan using an iPad and you don't know how they communicate, and you don't hear them talking, what's the best way to figure that out? Great question, Kara.
I think it was interesting. A friend of mine had seen that we were doing this communication webinar, and she actually sent me a podcast, and it was about communication. And they had a guest on there that was using an iPad for communication, and that was kind of something that she answered. And she was like, just ask, just like we were saying, like if you see someone with a disability, don't be afraid to ask, just ask. And then if you don't understand, say, hey, I'm sorry. Or if they're communicating with you, you don't understand. But if you don't understand their way of communicating, say, hey, I'm really sorry, I didn't understand that. Can you please repeat yourself? Or is there a way that I can help better understand you. And I just thought that was interesting because sometimes you feel like you don't want to ask someone to repeat themselves, or you don't necessarily want to ask them like, I know you've all been there, like, what was that person's name? I don't want to ask them again. Or, how do they communicate? I don't understand. I've never heard of that way of communicating, but take the time to just ask. It's really that simple, and learn about it so you're educated in the future to communicate with someone else in that regards.
Awesome. Great question for sure. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
So something else, because I am in sales and I have a sales team and so forth, that one of the things in which we sometimes teach our salespeople is that if a person is standing up versus sitting down, you can either kneel down beside the person or get in a chair and sit beside that person. So you're not constantly, looking up at the person, in a sense, theoretically breaking your neck, trying to constantly look up at somebody. You want to be able to speak with that person on that same plane, to be able to communicate with them, whether it's physical gestures or what have you. I think if you're still eye contact with them, I think that that's a great thing to be able to try to get on that same playing field. But I think and I'm trying to get back to the chat. Yes, thank you. Kara's question. I think also, just like Erica said, if you're transparent with a person and just flat out ask, most people aren't going to look at you, as I mean, I think it's all on how you phrase things. If you're diplomatic about how you phrase something and not coming across as, inappropriate, then that person's going to be very transparent in how to communicate with you. Now, if they're, derogatory, then, they might have some defense mechanisms up. But most people, if they're curious, they're going to ask in the right and appropriate way.
Well, so how would you encourage someone to ask? Obviously, something like "What's wrong with you?" may be a little on the insensitive side. Though it's coming from a child, I think it's a little more understandable. But what's a better way? How do you coach your staff to talk to people if they were going to ask?
The way you stated it originally is, yes, if that is, it's appropriate from a child, is how do you address, but I mean, they sometimes don't have the best vernacular of coming up with things.
Sure.
Yeah, or they're just really blunt and, I think it's, how can you address that person? I think it's really how you're sitting down and having a conversation with them. As you build that connection with them and build that relationship and rapport with that person, you're going to be able to figure out how to communicate with that person most of the time. But I think the biggest things is we've hit it over and over again is addressing the person by name, addressing person because they are human. They're more than just a disability. They're more than just a chair. They're more than a son or a daughter or sister or brother. They're a human, and I think that we need to treat that person that same exact way.
And I think that's to go back to what you said. I think starting with "Hi, my name's Melanie. What's your name?" and then how they respond will give you an indication of their communication ability. But at least you're starting the conversation, and it can go from there. But thank you. That's really, really helpful. And I too am very excited to see things different for the generations to come, and a more inclusive world and a more understanding and hopefully patient world to let people express themselves how they need to. And I feel like, Jason, what you said is true, just like, prejudices and racism and is a learned behavior. So is how you treat people who live life differently than you. And I think the more we model love, the more love there'll be. So on that super wonderful poetic note, I guess we'll close. But thank you everyone for joining us. And we will have this on our YouTube channel. Please keep in touch with us. Let us know how we can be of assistance to you and your family and what other programs you might find helpful. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you. And thank you again, CJ, Jason, and Erica. See you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Be well.